Now, step into the incredible, amazing future as we go exploring tomorrow. And now, here is your guide to these adventures of the mind, the editor of Astounding Science Fiction magazine, John Campbell, Jr.
The essential character of any frontier you explore is that if you get into it and stick your neck out, you get it lopped off, and there's no help. The frontier is the place where there isn't any reserve, where there isn't anyone to help you if you get into trouble. There is no support. Tonight's story is a story of a true frontier. You know, sometimes the frontier lies just the other side of a doorway. It doesn't seem very different. It can be the difference between life and sudden death.
John W. Campbell became, in the 1930s, one of the most important editors in the history of science fiction literature. I mean, he was one of the writers and editors that helped push science fiction into a kind of adult level, and he wanted it to be scientifically believable and believable on an emotional level. One of the interesting things about Who Goes There was it sort of had its genesis in his childhood. His mother and his aunt were identical twins.
As a child, that confused him. You know, I mean, like, is that mama or isn't it? Which is a spooky idea. It's not something we ever particularly think of.
And so he was having to deal with this idea of someone who looks like someone you love and is extremely close to you, but isn't.
And that evolved over the years into his novella, Who Goes There, about this crew of scientists down at the South Pole who discover what apparently is a flying ship from generations ago with some sort of alien thing on it.
And they wind up thawing out this creature that's frozen in a block of ice. They've destroyed the ship accidentally while trying to break it out of the ice using a thermite bomb. And the creature is this object of incredible horror to them. It's described as having these 3 burning red eyes and these hair-like worms. It's about 6 feet tall, and it has this look of absolute rage on its face.
It's a shape-shifting thing. It takes the shape of anything around it. So they don't know who or what may be part of the thing now, but they realize that over the course of the story, this thing can replace anything, and ultimately it will replace every living thing on Earth.
We're accustomed to certain little signs, symbols, facial expressions, tones of voice that have meaning when a human being is communicating with a human being. But we have no system of signs and no code of communication with the alien. How could we tell what the alien was thinking?
It turns out not only is it telepathic and a shapeshifter, it's also a kind of colony being. It doesn't necessarily have to take one form. It can be multiple creatures. And gradually it starts to kill off and take the form of the team's dogs, of members of the team. And gradually, they all start to become more and more and more paranoid.
The frankness of the language. The way that Campbell wrote this is like, holy smokes. And it really just kind of blasts through what you would consider censorship from that time period. Just its presentation is not at all that kind of, I think, formality that we were kind of used to in fantasy writing from that period, or that sense of innocence, if you will. I think the first line is something like, it stinks in here.
And meanwhile, the setting of the story itself is a character in the story. This horrible, frozen, windswept, snow-covered landscape that is every bit as hostile towards them as the creature itself is always there in the background.
It is a science fiction story that probably gave birth to a whole genre of science fiction stories.
The story was originally published in 1938 in his own magazine, Astounding, It was published under the pseudonym Don Stewart, so he effectively sold it to himself. He sold it to his own magazine.
John Campbell's stuff was fairly popular within the pulp market, sci-fi categories in the 30s and the 40s. And sometime in 47, 48, when Howard Hawks was shooting in Germany, he was shooting I Was a Male War Bride. He happened across a pulp sci-fi magazine, Amazing Stories or something like that, which had the Campbell story in it. And he read it and he said, this might make a good picture.
Howard Hawks was one of the greatest American filmmakers of Hollywood's golden age. He was very much an autocrat. He was very much an auteur of his films. He made a great film in virtually every genre. He made a great gangster film, Scarface, lots of great comedies like His Girl Friday and I Was a Male War Bride. He made great westerns, Red River.
He said, okay, now we've had these flying saucers in the newspapers and all of this kind of stuff. People are scared of the atom bomb and the Russians. It's time for this story.
All these things were going on during this era. What were we going to find, if you will, beyond the stars? So Rocket Ship XM and Destination Moon and all that was so much a theme of the films that were being made. But here comes the movie about something that's all from up there and it lands here. And the film was prepared by one of his favorite screenwriters, Charlie Lee Darrah, who had worked on His Gal Friday.
But he wasn't really a fantasist as such. What he brought to it that I think works extremely well is the comedy, is the banter.
One of the first things that Hawks did was throw out about 2/3 of Campbell's story. So what they did was essentially take the first third of the story. You establish the location, the pole, and in the case of The Thing, it's the North Pole. It was the South Pole in the book.
When we would think of Russia, certainly during that period, we think of the Russian front. We think of those images. We think of snow and ice and those soldiers and everything else. And suddenly we're being told that's the enemy. Where are they coming from? They're coming from the land of ice.
And this group of scientists who are there discovering this flying craft that has this thing on it. And they bring it back and it's still alive. That's about as much as the Campbell stuff as there is.
Russell Harlan was part of the Hawks unit. He was going to shoot it. So it was very much prepared within Winchester Productions, which was Howard Hawks' middle name. And it was going to be under the framework. And of course, the theory was that Hawks himself was going to direct it.
Hawks had done something to anger the Directors Guild on his previous film. And at the same time, Chris Nyby, who had been editing not just for Hawks, but Raoul Walsh and a whole lot of other people for years, he wanted to graduate, take the next step. He wanted to direct.
He understood Hawks's rhythms. He understood the way he liked to shoot. So I think it was important to him that he actually not direct it, but give it to the hands of somebody that he trusted. Practically every single cast member had some connection or another to Hawks. Margaret Sheridan, who actually gets top billing, had been a Hawks leading lady. I believe she actually was intended to be in Red River.
Bob Cornthwaite, that plays Dr. Carrington, was later in Monkey Business. Ken Tobey had been in I Was a Male War Bride. Dewey Martin was in The Big Sky and Land of the Pharaohs later.
You've got this one very striking guy, John Dierkes is his name. Big tall guy who looks like he'd be at home out in the range. And in fact, he did a lot of westerns.
Paul Frees, who of course became one of the great voiceover actors of the 20th century. And Douglas Spencer, who's very, very funny as the reporter. Of course, the reporter is almost a carryover from the front page in His Girl Friday, with Lederer and Hecht.
These people are absolutely, utterly isolated. They're at the top of the world. They're hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand miles from any sort of civilization. There's also a storm coming in, so there's no way to get in, no way to get out. And there's a monster that wants to kill them all and drink their blood. That's a wonderful idea. Well, to capture that, Howard Hawks decided, we're not going to go to the North Pole, but where can we go? And what his researchers found was a place called Cut Bank in Montana, which was a huge flat area that the Air Force had commandeered as a base. So the entire company, the entire cast went up there. You know, it got delayed a couple of days because all the snow would come down every night. You know, and you'd have 6 inches or a foot or whatever. But then by 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, it would all blow away, and then you'd have all these just empty areas, which is, you know, where the planes came in. Here they are, you know, up in really nearly Arctic conditions, with, you know, this huge snowless, iceless expanse of runway, and then, you know, back farther than is useful, a whole bunch of snow on the mountains. And some little kid was hanging out there, some little local kid, just kind of watching them. And he said to one of them, "What you doing?" He said, "Go away, kid. We're making a movie." Well, why are you doing it here? Because it's supposed to be snowy. It's supposed to be like the North Pole. It's supposed to be. Leave me. You're bothering me. Well, it doesn't snow here. Oh, sure, it snows all over the place. It snows like a foot every night. Yeah, but it doesn't snow here. That's why the Air Force had chosen that, because every morning the wind comes in and blows all the snow away. Anyway, so after several months of getting absolutely nothing in Montana, Howard Hawks says, "All right, well, let's go back to Hollywood and take care of this." And they shot everything back in Hollywood at the RKO stages, but the exterior, so like the shots out where they find the saucer and blow it up and so on, that was done out of the RKO Ranch. That's in Encino. They had a sky there that was probably 70 feet tall. That's what they used in the thing. In the Campbell original, the original image of the creature that you see kind of vaguely through this ice is covered with kind of purplish tentacles, like, you know, like 1,000 worms that are all frozen, luckily. And early on, the Hawks and Charlie Lederer, who wrote the script, didn't really know what they were going to do. That was a way to go.
Is it human or inhuman? Earthly or unearthly?
They couldn't figure out exactly what he should look like. You know, they were on their own. Nobody had ever done this before. So Howard Hawks deferred to Lee Greenway, who was a terrific makeup artist.
You've got to think of his conception. It's a vegetable man, and you know, you read a script with nothing to bring to it other than maybe the original story. You know, you getting hold of what this thing should look like is very difficult. So I know that Lee Greenway, he drove out, I guess, to Howard Hawks' house with a new sculpture every couple of weeks, and some of the early ones just look like, you know, a pumpkin head or a vegetable man or whatever.
During this time, Howard Hughes, who owned RKO, sent Howard Hawks a memo of concern, saying, "This new picture you're doing, I don't know that I'm enthusiastic about an old-fashioned, you know, horror picture." And Hawks sent back a rather thoughtful, friendly letter to Howard Hughes, saying, "Howard, you know, this is completely new. You know, it's just cutting-edge aeronautics here, and we've worked in the Russians, you know, and the early warning system at the pole. You know, everything's going to be absolutely up to date. This is going to be a shocker, you know, with torn out of the front pages, and the monster in it, the Heavy, is going to be terrific. You know, it's going to be absolutely unworldly." So, flip ahead a couple of weeks to Lee Greenway, showing yet another variation on what this thing is supposed to look like, and Howard Hawks comes in, looks at it, and just shrugs. He said, "Make him look like Frankenstein," and walked out.
That thing's alive, sir. I saw it. I shot at it. I hit it. I know it. Nothing happened. It just kept coming at me, making a noise like a cat mewing. Captain, it was awful. If you could have seen those hands and those eyes. Captain, you've got to do something about it. You've got.
It gave an identity, interestingly, to a story about lack of identity, a story about identity constantly changing, they decided to focus on an enemy.
It's just a straightforward, man-like creature who is apparently here to pave the way for an invasion of characters like him, all of whom want to drink our blood. That's actually a lot simpler and a lot more direct.
James Arness was a young contract player at RKO, really made an incredible impression in John Ford's Wagon Master as just the most murderous, vile member of that inbred family. I think, quite honestly, I've always thought that that performance led to the casting in The Thing. He was already there at RKO. He was physically very large.
And you know, one of the best things about his contribution is the hands. The hand has that wonderful scene, and of course Lee Greenway sculpted those too.
If the creature in The Thing seems conventional now, you got to understand this was 1951. They were inventing science fiction as a genre. Until Destination Moon and Rocket Ship XM and Day the Earth Stood Still and The Thing, there was almost nothing in America of what we consider modern science fiction cinema. They're inventing it as they go along.
The lovely thing is that they don't show the monster. We have photographs now that were nowhere around when I was a kid. I mean, that you just did not see that. And that was intentional and works wonderfully.
It's a containment movie. I mean, that's the thing. And people seem to think because Howard Hawks, they think of cattle drives, they think of Westerns. And the thing was, Howard Hawks was a director who did a lot of movies that took place entirely indoors.
People that worked on the film gave various accounts. Some said Hawks was the overriding influence. Some said he would rehearse the actors and maybe would shoot. I mean, there's different people that worked on it said different things. There is an overwhelming feeling of this being a Howard Hawks film, though.
There are no close-ups in the entire movie. Well, I take it back. There is one single close-up, and that you can't see. That's the close-up of the monster's head in the ice. You know, it's a big block of ice with a thing laying there, and you can't see a thing. All you can see is this vague outline of this head. And that was intentional, because Chris Nyby, as an editor, knew how you could reform a film. You could change, you know, a minor character into a major character. You could change that good guy into a bad guy. You could eliminate a character entirely. You could speed up a film, slow it down, all with, if you had the coverage. And his thought was, why don't we just shoot it so there is no other way other than the one we're doing? And Hawks said, yeah, fine.
I think probably my very, very favorite thing in the movie is where they're going down the corridor after the monster, and they look in the lab, or well, no, it's not in there, but that's radioactive, something else. That's the point. And it's really like a downbeat moment, and only a great director can get away with this. You're thinking there's going to be something more and something more and something more, and then they might find the monster, and they open the door, and it's right there. And actually, if you look at that carefully, there's a little dolly in the camera to help reveal that moment, but it doesn't tip off that it's coming.
Gentlemen, do you realize what we've found? A being from another world, as different from us as one pole from the other. If we can only communicate with it.
In the Campbell novella, it's a scientific installation. And interestingly, in the Hawks version, it's a more of a military installation. The real heroes of the film, of the Hawks version, it's the military. And the scientists are sort of considered suspect, especially Carrington. Carrington is looked upon with a kind of distrust, you know, that as scientists were the people that created the atomic bomb. Scientists are the ones that are creating all these hellish new hazards in the modern age.
You have the military going, look, this is an invader that has to be eliminated because they're here to eliminate us. And the scientific community is going, no, this is something foreign that we can learn from and therefore needs to be preserved. And these things just keep colliding.
One of the interesting things to me is how sort of Russian Carrington's character looks. He's got the big furry hat and he has the kind of Lenin beard and everything. And he's so icy, as I think Americans would have, perhaps thought Russians were at the time.
Of course, the scientist ends up being misguided because he steals blood to feed the plants, and Bob Cornthwaite goes to this creature and says, "Oh, please let me communicate with you," and everything else. And he gets a busted collarbone and a fractured face and everything else because he, get out of the way, Poindexter. That's really the reaction. So that gives Ken Tobey the right to pick up a machine gun, and they start firing, and then of course electricity. But that conflict, I think, is the way that they then express the other themes that are in the short story.
There's also that closing line, keep watching the skies. This is, I think, endemic of that kind of Cold War paranoia that's hard for, I think, modern audiences to understand. The Thing from Another World was one of the first hit science fiction movies of the 50s. You have to understand that selling a science fiction movie to a studio in the 1950s was very, very difficult. They had very little faith in them. They thought they were silly. They thought it should be, Flash Gordon with a rocket with a sparkler flying behind it.
You even look at the trailer for The Thing. It's very revealing because they're telling you Howard Hawks of Big Sleep and Howard Hawks of this, that. So just so you know all the big credits, so they can say this is his new film. They're kind of slipping it in because they're not really sure that an alien film is going to be big box office.
And there was a lot of publicity, kind of this vague, oblique stuff. What is the thing? Who is the thing, and so forth, where you didn't really tell what was going on. Doctors fear the thing, children are killed by the thing. They were all over the place. It was a neat teaser idea.
It plugged into, if you will, this feeling, not only enthusiasm for space exploration and rocket travel, all these things that were brand new, but also the idea of the paranoia of the Red Menace and the paranoia that came automatically with the atomic bomb.
Just before the movie came out, there was a Phil Harris novelty song called The Thing. And Phil Harris was this bumptious, down-home singer, band leader. And this was a funny novelty song. But it became a big hit. Well, okay, now we've got this major picture. We've spent $1 million plus on it, and people are going to think it's this Phil Harris song, which is why they call it The Thing from Another World under there. Because if you see, look at the main title, even the main title on the trailer, which is something else, clearly adding From Another World on there was all after the fact.
The fact that it was bankable, the fact that it was a hit, and the fact that you could make a very, very frightening science fiction horror movie helped pave the way for, dozens and dozens and dozens of other, sometimes good, sometimes awful, alien invasion movies in the 50s. And there were a slew of them. My friend was a big admirer of the film The Thing. And he got to talking to Campbell about it. And Campbell said, "What do you think of the movie?" And he said, "I think it's a really outstanding film." And Campbell said, "Well, I'm not a judge of movies, really. It could be a very good movie, but it's not my story." And Campbell was deeply disappointed that they dropped the shapeshifter aspect of the story, the telepathy aspect of the story, in favor of going for a much more straightforward monster, this vegetable creature.
My exposure to the short story, Who Goes There? I was recovering from an operation at the age of 12, and my late brother gave it to me in a collection of short stories entitled Adventures of Time and Space. This all stayed with me as I began developing an education in movies while watching them, wanted to make them, and landed in 1969 at USC Cinema Department, where I met John Carpenter. This is probably one of the first times we talked about the movie at length. I think John was a bigger fan of it than I was.
John Carpenter said he was absolutely terrified of it as a child, as I'm sure a lot of people were.
And I said, well, yeah, but have you read the short story? And John said, oh, yeah, it's, it's really good. And Dan O'Bannon, who was also there, said, yeah, it's terrific. I mean, it's, nobody's, done anything about it, Didn't take it any further than that. It was just, the fact that John was aware of it. And John was one of the few people, along with Dan at USC, that had an education in science fiction. Literature science fiction, had been reading as I had for years and years.
You think about how few people went along the path that John Carpenter did. In 1970, a short film that he worked on, The Resurrection of Bronco Billy, was awarded an Academy Award. His student film was expanded for a theatrical release in 1975. That was Dark Star.
Carpenter has said that Hawks was his favorite director, and there's an obvious enormous influence of Hawks on his first film after Dark Star. And Assault on Precinct 13 is almost like a modern urban inner city version of Hawks' Rio Bravo.
Precinct 13, cut off, isolated in the middle of a city, as a human wave of street killers turns the night into a nightmare.
So sometime around the middle of 1977, I met producer David Foster, and I took him my only copy of the short story. And I sat down with him and I said, listen, I have an idea for a thinking man's monster movie. He said, well, I think we can do something with this. And at that point, Universal bought the rights to the short story in perpetuity for us to produce.
To cover all the bases, Universal also acquired the remake rights to the original film and title from Wilbur Stark, who would eventually get an executive producer credit on the film. Stark owned the remake rights for the bulk of the RKO film library.
Almost immediately, the studio had a suggestion for us. They had recently signed Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel, based on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they suggested Tobe and Kim for the project.
His script with Kim Henkel didn't feature the trust angle that we got in Campbell's story, Who Goes There? And the producers were looking more to incorporate that original story, and so they parted ways with Tobe Hooper.
Cohen wanted Carpenter to direct the film from the beginning, but Universal was reluctant to let such an inexperienced director take the project. Of course, a few years later, he went on to revolutionize horror filmmaking with Halloween.
Halloween night. A small American town. 15 years ago.
But the impetus to make a Thing remake, I believe, really came about in 1978 because a remake of another 1950s film, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, starring Donald Sutherland and Leonard Nimoy, directed by Philip Kaufman, was very successful. It won critical accolades.
But in the back of my mind, I knew there was going to be an event happening that might change the equation considerably. And that event was the release of Alien on May 25th, 1979.
Well, science fiction had kind of lain dormant. The studios weren't pouring a lot of money into them. Star Wars and Alien proved to be major game changers in terms of bringing back the genre of both science fiction, horror, and fantasy.
On Monday morning, May 28th, I walked into David Foster's office at Universal. He had Variety open, and the grosses, which were stellar for the film that weekend. And I just asked David a question. I said, do you think they'll understand now? And David said, yeah, I'm sure they will. And Tannen said, yeah, go ahead, sign John, we'll back it.
He was truly the choice for the movie because I don't think anyone else had that just astounding passion for the film, and certainly the passion he had and continues to have for Howard Hawks.
If you go back and watch Halloween, you'll see that the film Howard Hawks' The Thing is there. It's on the TV screen for the horror movie matinee, that they're watching all night while Michael Myers is killing people. So he clearly loved the film, but he wasn't interested in redoing what somebody else had done.
He saw it as an iconic piece, but he also was a huge fan of the original short story and understood the psychological aspects that had not been exploited, which were far deeper than the original Hawks version.
I'd seen The Bad News Bears the year before, I was really, really impressed with particularly its screenplay by Bill Lancaster. I just thought it a model of construction and very human. And, I thought it was just a terrific script, even a better script than the movie that was made from it. I really wanted Bill in for this project and suggested him to John. And it was a mind meld. It was really the perfect blend of idea, of personality. John, this is the first time I'd seen John comfortable with another writer in the room.
When Carpenter approached his version of The Thing, the influence of Hawks was going to be the tension of isolation, the tension of everything getting smaller and smaller and smaller, the group getting smaller and smaller, and that they were constantly under attack, constantly under siege in this limited space.
And he began talking about developing levels of paranoia and trust issues between the men, so severe that you were never really sure there was a monster or not. I could see John listening to this, responding, and my own interpretation was, okay, you supply the structure and I'll supply the monster. And on that sort of basis, a relationship was formed,
By going back to that original novella, it is so reflective of what the final movie is. It really is that novella in so many ways, right off the pages onto the screen.
A lot of the characters have the same names, Copper, McGrady, and the basic idea of the shapeshifter remained. The blood test, the basic, the storyline, the basic crux of it, it's all there.
The idea that Blair was really it, and that Blair was, the character was taken over early, and the motivation of the monster itself, which is basically a clever creature that finds out what it can about the humans that it's assimilating, makes some choices about who to assimilate because it's costly and difficult to do, but realizes the best way to deal with the situation is to get them in fighting among themselves and absent itself from the scene.
One of the things that carries over from The Thing from Another World into the Carpenter version is the humor, is the banter between the men in the team, the scientific team. That's a very, very Hawksian kind of element, and the wisecracks, the funny lines, that there is a humor that runs through it, in spite of the fact that Carpenter's The Thing could have been an overwhelmingly bleak, overwhelmingly grim, overwhelmingly ugly movie.
David Foster asked me to put pressure on Bill, who was running late with it. There was actually the original hope that we could get the film ready for summer of 1981 if they were to approve it. A couple of things intervened with that. One was John's possible commitment on Escape from New York, and the other, the bill, wasn't close to being finished. And either the script was, as John said when he read it, it's one of the finest scripts I've ever read. And that was my feeling. And David said, they're going to be crazy if they don't want to make this. And if they don't want to make it, we'll take it somewhere else. A new contract was drawn up for John at that point. And among other things, contractually, he had the right to hire, and these were written into the contract, Larry Franco, Dean Cundy, and Todd Ramsey, and had the right of first refusal as its composer, as the film's composer.
Dean Cundy and John Carpenter were regular collaborators on a number of films. They worked together on Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York. And I think it's pretty clear from looking at those films that they have a symbiotic working relationship, that Carpenter's vision dovetails incredibly with Dean Cundy's camera work, and that when we think of those films, that's sort of the focal point of the Carpenter look in cinema.
My work had been always sort of little independent films, so to be working on a major lot, to have the facilities that a major studio has as far as stages and the budget to make what it needed to make an interesting shot.
We knew immediately that we were not going to try and do something on the stage as an exterior, because at most of the time, and nowadays you can do it a little bit better, but in those days it always looked terrible. So we never ever considered doing anything exterior on a stage. So anything that happened outside, we were going to do outside. The biggest challenge was, okay, where are we going to build the exterior of this camp in a place that we can access? I don't know how we ended up where we ended up exactly, but I do remember we took a lot of planes, trains, and automobiles to scout different locations, and most of it came from the Film Commission, from the British Columbia Film Commission.
I had been talking to people in Canada, and the interesting thing is you have to drive into the United States and then back into Canada again to get to this glacier. You go from Stewart to Hyder, Alaska, and then up an ice road, basically, a mountain ice road, to back into Canada, and that puts you on top of the glacier.
It was intended that we would build the set in the summer and let it be snowed in, and it was going to have to be designed and built like a real practical structure. First of all, because of the amount of snowfall that would hit it in terms of the roof, and also we wanted it to be able to provide shelter for the crew in case it couldn't get back down off the mountain. John began originally, he said this in interviews, and he certainly said it to us. He said, "What I don't want is a man in a suit." John said, "Look, even Alien, Alien ended up being a man in a suit. I don't want a man in a suit."
We now have the special effects technology to do the monster in the way it was in the story, as this kind of shape-changing monster. We can do the issue of trust, who's a man, who's a thing. We don't have to do a monster carrot like we did in the 1950s.
Early on, we began discussing ideas and people to do them. Even Geiger's name came up, but Geiger was just too distinctive. David Foster and Larry Terman had produced a film called Caveman and had worked with its monster designer, a gentleman named Dale Kuipers, who actually designed many of the creatures. His basic design was modeled after what Bill Lancaster had originally written in the script. John was never that comfortable with the design. I remember him looking at this painting thinking, how the am I gonna shoot this and make it look realistic? We were right in the middle of prep. We had 8 weeks to go before filming. We needed to move immediately on to someone else. There was really one obvious choice, and he'd been lingering in the background for a year or so, and that was Rob Bottin.
John Carpenter and Rob Bottin had worked together previously on The Fog. In fact, Rob Bottin played the villain of The Fog in some scenes. He was Captain Blake, the pirate, leper, ghost character in that film. But understand that the work that was done on The Fog, amazing, of course, but not on the scale of The Thing.
He was very, very nervous, and he was very young. He was probably one of the youngest people on the picture. I thought he was scared to death he was going to screw up, but he had to, of course, convince all of us that he had it all under control.
The title of the movie is The Thing. So obviously, the audience is going to be expecting, we were expecting, and it was really up to Rob to kind of deliver some really spectacular stuff.
And Rob wanted to go in a different direction. And what Rob eventually came up with, as we saw, was a monster that deconstructed.
Rob would be working with Mike Plug and Mentor Ebner, coming up with these design concepts. And after we kind of had approval on the designs, we would meet in the conference room with Dave Kelsey, Rob, and myself, and kind of figure out how we were going to approach achieving these effects.
Rob's idea was that the monster would always be changing, that there would be no final form. And John liked the idea that what we were getting at were things that he had not seen before on screen.
John bought into it, and I actually talked to John later on, and he said, Rob, his imagination was amazing. I think for, a guy that's 21, 22 years old, to have that kind of an imagination and that kind of opportunity, it's like the gift of a lifetime.
And the other portion of it was in Stewart, British Columbia, which was that was a fascinating experience too. We ended up on a road that led to a copper mine that was a real operating copper mine. And we built this little spur off the road, and then we were down right next to a glacier. We were on solid ground. We weren't on the glacier itself, but we were right close to it.
We would have to bus every morning for about 45 minutes or so up this little narrow dirt road that led from this very Wild West town of Stewart all the way up to what was really the mine, the purpose of the town.
And they had road markers all the way up the hill, mile 1, mile 2, mile 3, and mile 4. and they had the trucks that were loaded with ore were coming down the mountain. They had right of way, no matter what, because they're doing like 30 or 40 miles an hour, which is really fast of a, you know, how many ton truck down this sort of road like that. And so we you know, and then we had it all set up with the universal drivers and this and that. So we're in the van, and so we're in the van in the morning, dark 30 or something. Universal 1 north at 2, yeah, okay. Then you'd hear K55 south at 4. Now you're thinking to yourself, okay, so we're at mile 2, he's at 4. So somewhere near mile 3, we have to get off the road. You know what I mean?
When we got to Alaska to film, oh my God, this is the same room that I left on the soundstage. Exactly. I mean, that I had really never experienced. And I thought, I just cannot believe, I was so geeked.
Radio's gone.
So are the choppers.
Yeah, we're completely cut off. All we can do now is hole up till spring, wait for the rescue team.
I remember the first day on location out there, we all had Army issue, Universal issue jackets on with these big hoods in the front. Nobody knew who anybody was. So you'd have to go around and talk to the guy in front of him to find it. So next, you know, and within 2 hours, everybody had their name taped on the back of their thing, you know, and we were all, it was freezing cold. We were all cold all the time, and we were having trouble with the equipment because it was so cold, and the lens were fogging up.
We're shooting outside with the camera, and then the camera assistants would take it inside one of the buildings to work on it. The heat and humidity in the buildings would fog up all of the lenses on the inside and stuff. So they had to take the doors and windows off of the camera room, and it had to stay the, you know, very, very cold temperatures of the outside, so that the cameras, you know, we never had any issues with the cameras.
You know, there were times when we just had to kill time because they couldn't let us go away, because away was an hour and a half bus ride through the snow and back. So we pretty much had to stay where we were, even if we weren't on camera.
And I really think that the fact that the entire cast lived together in this rather remote town really gave them sort of an understanding of what the lifestyle of.
How long were you alone with that dog?
I don't know, an hour and a half maybe. What the hell are you looking at me like that for?
I don't know.
The next thing we did was the Norris chest ripping open and Dr. Cooper's arms going in and getting severed. We achieved that by having Charlie Callahan in a position where his heart is in under the table and his head and arms are exposed. On top of that was a mechanism with the shark-like teeth that would open and close.
To mechanize that, we needed some power. It couldn't just be monofilament pulling on these things, so we had hydraulic rams.
Much of the work that we did on the thing had never been done before. It required a lot of experimentation and quick fixes. It required that we would spend days on end at Universal Heartland. Many of the crew would be laid out in the conference room, the only room that had carpet, to grab a quick cat nap. We were a young crew. Most of us were in our 20s, some were in their teens. And we just went the extra mile to create this effects that are now a milestone in special makeup effects.
The saucer model is an interesting story by itself. It was built by an extremely talented woman model maker named Susan Turner.
It was shot with a motion control camera. Jim Danforth did the matte painting of Earth. I did the animation on the spaceship exhaust, and Pete did.
So he came back to Morricone, and he didn't speak Italian, and Morricone, I don't think, barely spoke any English, through an interpreter. And he played him, the score he'd done for Escape from New York. And basically said, this is kind of more what I'm looking for. So Morricone went back, not to the drawing board, but to do additional cues. And he hired a synthesist and essentially did his version of a John Carpenter score.
Then John comes at the very end of the thing, post-production. He's gone through his editing, he's gone through the score, and kind of gave me a call and said, hey, I need a couple of things from you, can I come over? And in one afternoon, John sat down, I had the studio, all the equipment, and we created
a new one sheet arrived on our desks. We had been used to being consulted in terms of the advertising and publicity. This happened without our knowledge, and it was the now famous Struzan poster. John commented that he began this project by not trying to make a monster that featured a man in a suit. And what do we end up with on the one sheet? A man in a suit.
When I saw the one sheet, I really sort of felt, underwhelmed, because it didn't have anything that told you about the, fantastic adventure you were going to go on.
This was presented to us as a fait accompli. This is it. And John and I both thought it was a concession to B-movie status. The one sheet that we had in mind before that was done in black and white. We wanted a black and white campaign. The studio kind of agreed with us. And we had a final design that shows the camp with a large sort of evil-looking cloud overhanging the camp, filled with portent. Something that kind of reminded us of Curse of the Demon.
100,000 years ago, it found its way into our galaxy.
Film scheduled to open June 25th. The trailer that we liked and approved before the preview, before Sid and the studio began changing things. The trailer was cut and attached to the head end of every print of E.T., which was good for us. Not that it was necessarily our audience, but you certainly want your trailer to be seen by the largest audience in motion picture history, and it was, and mostly rejected by the largest audience in motion picture history.
John Carpenter's The Thing was a victim of bad timing, and some people say also bad marketing on the part of Universal. The Thing came out in the summer of 1982, and people will tell you that was Spielberg's summer. And along comes John Carpenter's The Thing. Is no holds barred. It's balls to the wall. It is something you have never seen before. It is strong, and it's going to scare the shit out of you.
And it wasn't just a bomb. It wasn't just the fact that the movie didn't make money. The problem was that the critical reception of it was absolutely savage.
The reviews of the Carpenter version of The Thing were really mercilessly unkind in the way that, say, the reviews of Michael Powell's Peeping Tom had been. The critics were downright bullying it.
One reviewer called John Carpenter a pornographer of violence. Another said he was more suitable to directing traffic accidents and public floggings than films. Another critic said they went to see The Thing and they found it bereft and nihilistic and despairing. And the worst thing was the total absence of love.
One review I read said, oh, it's not something you can take your kids to. I mean, it's gory and all this. And I'm like, well, don't take the kid. What is this? What a stupid thing to say. Don't take your kids.
But I can just remember after a couple of them saying, you know what, you people, go fuck off. I mean, basically it was like, are you kidding me? Especially after the work that we put into it. I mean, it was a grind.
And Carpenter took it very, very hard. In fact, as we know, he has said that he never really recovered from the fact that this was the project where he really put himself out there and he got his head handed to him.
If his career was on blazing ascent like a rocket achieving escape velocity before The Thing, all of that was about to turn around.
Because The Thing was not particularly successful at the box office, Universal got cold feet on Carpenter's version of Stephen King's Firestarter, cut the budget, which caused Carpenter to walk from the project. Just the first of one of many ways of how The Thing would negatively impact his career going forward.
The good fortune is, over time, the film has become increasingly realized, I think, as a masterpiece of that genre.